This can really be defined, to break it down better, as being a desire for reputation, a need for respect. It can be the form of peer pressure. It can be in the form of people pleasing, or even rear its head as codependency. The fear of man comes in many forms. It can come in the form of, I'm too scared to do this because of what people think. But it can also, what most people don't realize is the opposite approach is saying, I don't care what people think, I'm just going to say it all and stuff like that. And it really comes from a place of fear. And it's a fear of what will happen if you don't do that.
Whatever you worship above God, that's the area in your life where you're going to have trouble. Whatever you're trying to put before God, that will end up being a detriment to you. And when you put God first, it's like Matthew chapter 6. It's like the Lord knows you need these things, and all these things will be added onto you.
Right.
Seek first the kingdom of heaven.
God is making up the difference for you, because when he looks at you, he sees Jesus. He sees Jesus.
It was that moment, I'll never forget it, that I realized, no, just because my parents go to church or whatever's going on, there has to be something that happens personally between me and Christ. All right, welcome back to the Life and Faith podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that, I've been kicking around for a while. I've been trying to put something together for it and thinking, that's not good enough. And I even intended last time we met to record to cover the episode, and it's been a struggle for me. So anytime there's a struggle for me, I understand this is something that's probably going to impact people. It's probably something that Satan is not going to like, and so full disclosure, that's kind of been the internal struggle for me. But it's a topic that I'm learning myself, and as I'm learning, I'm like, I want to speak this truth to other people and hopefully help them in the way it's helped me. The topic is the fear of man. And when we're talking about the fear of man, this can really be defined, to break it down better, as being a desire for reputation, a need for respect. It can be the form of peer pressure, which is not just for young adults, it's for adults of all ages. It can be in the form of people pleasing, or even rear its head as codependency. So it's really a vast subject, but it's also one that the Bible gives a lot of attention to. So, anything that the Bible mentions frequently, it should be something that we think about frequently and talk about frequently. Some people can do well at a task, but never wholeheartedly devote themselves. Then when they aren't successful and their self-esteem is in the dumpster, they can tell themselves that they would have been the best at that thing if they had worked harder. That's kind of a repeated pattern that people find themselves in. I found myself in that before. It can almost rear its head as in the form of procrastination. I don't know how many of you listening, you're familiar with procrastination. You think, well, I could do that really good, but I'm going to put it off because to kind of temper your own ambitions there. Is it really Christ that we are standing on, or are we standing on ourselves, our perceived success, and the favorable opinions of others? Somebody put it this way once, I read this. We are almost like a walking love tank with a leak. And then we go into marriage like this, and we say, this person can help fill me. Or maybe it turns into substance abuse. This can help fill my tank. Or this and that. And we grab at lots of things to fill our love tank, but we are really empty, looking for another person to fill us or another thing. This is where a lot of marriages go awry, where if she doesn't think I am, you could say this as a man, if she doesn't think I am a great husband, it would crush me. I fell prey to this too, because I was one of those, you don't hear about this often, but I was probably about 12, maybe even younger than that, where I was thinking like, there's only going to be this so many more years and I'll be out of high school and then I want to get married. Like, I was thinking about marriage from a very young age. And some people could say like, wow, that's really admirable or something like that. But really, I think it was rooted in this idea of what I'm getting at is I really wanted another person to fill me. And I really had to come to the point where I realized that I can only be filled by God. And that is what, and you say, well, what does that have to do with the fear of man? Essentially, that was me fearing other people and having more reverence and respect for what they could do for me than what God himself could do. This idea of the fear of man is what or who you need in your life will come to control you. That fear that creeps in, it allows you to be controlled by that you need or that you covet most. You can be a worshiper of the true God and still fear other people, still struggle with that. I just recently talked about this coming from John 4 with where Jesus said, now is coming the time where the true worshipers who worships in spirit and in truth. So there is a distinction that God makes of empty worship and vain worship, but the true worship. But even then, with true worshipers of God, there can still be the fear of other people that can creep in. I'd like to set it up for talking today with this verse from Proverbs 29:25. It says, "For the fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord will be safe." Really, when we're talking about fear, to outline this further, fear in the biblical sense can include being afraid of somebody, but extends to holding someone in awe, being controlled or mastered by someone, worshiping someone even. How many of us have even seen in religious circles, it's under the guise of worshiping God, but it turns out to be worshiping man, right? Putting trust in someone or needing someone more than needing God. Essentially, to sum up all those things, any way that we replace God with people. So let me ask you guys this, and I can even share a time from my own childhood. Did you ever experience peer pressure as a kid? Maybe you don't have to share, but at least let me know.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't think I don't think they had to pressure me too hard though.
Yeah.
Like I got into chemicals pretty easily. You know what I mean? You could call it peer pressure, but it was more like it was too much pressure, hair trigger. Mm-hmm. I kind of jumped right in because I wanted to be cool, although cool was light years away from me. Do you know what I mean? And I think about that a lot, actually. If I had to live my life to live over, first of all, no regrets about how the Lord has used my life and made this life is much better than the one I had planned for myself. But I was so worried about what other people thought and being cool and being accepted by them that I thought about it constantly. While you were thinking about marriage, I was thinking about being cool. Mm-hmm. And it was just so, like, in retrospect, it was so far from me that, you know what I mean? And I would have had to have been a completely different person in order to actually get the acceptance that all these people I thought had, you know what I mean? Because I wasn't athletic, I wasn't good looking, I wasn't tall, I wasn't, you know what I mean? I didn't have a lot of money, I didn't have, it's like, there's no checks on any of the boxes. So what was in retrospect, it's like I could have just focused on my schoolwork and been so much further ahead in my adult life, rather than that. So, but yeah, there was peer pressure, and I just was like, oh, this will make me cool.
Yeah.
And smoking at like 15, I think, and smoking weed not too far after that, and
one thing
stealing,
leads to another, right?
and you're not cool. Well, nobody's like said it out loud, but like I got in trouble for stealing. Like I was probably like in 9th grade, I think, and I think I was in 10th grade, and I had just turned 17, and how I remember that is because I was in the police station, and because I had just turned 17 and I didn't remember it because of the shock of the experience. So I was like, I'm 16 years old, and they're like, okay, we'll call your mom. So because I was 16, so then my mom comes in, and the guy goes, well, if he was 17, we'd have to take him to jail. But since he's 16, he can go home with you. And she goes, he's 17. Take him to jail.
You're like, thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Which, in retrospect, again, good parenting.
Right.
But, I would do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I probably would have been like, you could probably take him even though he's 16, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would have done that. But yeah, peer pressure wasn't. Long explanation for a short answer to a question.
That's great. Yeah. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I think I experienced some similar kind of things with my belief system. Everybody around you believes the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was younger, I would have some sort of apprehension for these social issues. I would watch the videos of like, Ben Shapiro dunks on social justice, where, stuff like that. So I had this innate apprehension to buy into these kind of things. But, when everybody around you has the same kind of belief system, it's not like the typical peer pressure where it's like, come on, man, just do it. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But it was that social pressure where it's like, well, if I go against these belief systems, I'm going to be, ostracized. I'm going to be an outcast. I'm not going to fit in, so to speak. So it wasn't the typical what you would consider peer pressure, but there is definitely a kind of falling to that social pressure of, what are the people around me doing, and how can I cause the least disruption? Mm-hmm. How can I just kind of blend into the crowd, get by, and not have too much pushback on what I'm doing?
When I was that age, and I'm considerably older than both of you, when I came of age, or at that time, materialism was really ramping up, like branding mm-hmm. was really ramping up and everything. And so your social issues were our sneakers and jeans mm-hmm. and jackets and all that stuff. And it's so funny because for those same reasons, we weren't really like super socially aware. You know what I mean? We didn't really, that wasn't on the tongue of every person, especially not in high school. But what was like the Nikes, the, particular brands of jeans, the stores that you shopped at, that kind of the material, like, is there a label on every piece of your clothing kind of thing? And it's just so funny because like, if I don't have this, I'm not going to blend in. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? I'm going to be against the grain. And so for you guys, it might have been like, and it's like you talking about like watching videos on Ben Shapiro at that age. It's like, we would have been like a video, okay, like a cassette, you mean like a VHS cassette, like put it in this machine and hit play and wait for it to spin, It's like, no,
Yeah.
It's funny how things change.
Yeah. No, for me, I think I can think of one example that is still fresh in my mind of, I think I was about 11 years old, and I went over to a friend's birthday party, and he himself had a profession of faith, but he was still living in a family of unsaved people. And
this is as a kid?
I was 11 at the time. He was 11. And, great guy, and we really, I think, helped balance each other well. But I remember it was a far different scenario when it was just me and him versus if it was at a birthday party with all of his friends, because all of his friends didn't come from the same background as I did either. So, but rather than me being like, some sort of example to that group of friends, it worked the opposite way. And so I remember, I'll never forget, we went, so my mom picked me up from that birthday party. I think it was a sleepover. She picked me up in the morning, and then later that afternoon, we went over to a cousin's house for like a swim party or something. But something I was doing there, I don't even remember exactly what I was doing, but saying and doing things. And then my mom took me inside, and she's like, listen, if you're going to act like this, I'm not going to let you go over to anybody's birthday party again. And then it just dawned on me when she said all that, it didn't even, it completely snapped me out of like, oh, am I acting some way? And then I realized in that moment, because of what she said, that I am acting like all those people I was just around.
Yeah.
And it was that quick. Like, she knew, like, okay, this is not the Josh that I'm raising. He's a completely different person after just being over there a certain amount of time.
You're just being wild?
I don't know exactly what I was doing, but I was saying and doing things that she's like, this is not Josh.
You're smoking and drinking. And a martini and a big old cigarette in your hand.
Yeah, maybe if I was older, I don't know. But all that to say, like, I've heard somebody put it this way, and in recent years, they've talked about when it comes to their family and raising children, it's almost like a chef who has a recipe for a soup or whatever, and then you're like, I'm putting in these ingredients, and then one day you're tasting the soup and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't put that in there. Who put that in there? And it's almost like when the parents, you've probably all heard this, your parents say, oh, who taught you that? Or who told you that? You know, like I remember my dad saying that all the time, like, because he's like, because he never said this, but the implication was, we're not telling you that, so where are you hearing that from?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was an example of like, I didn't even realize in that moment that I was being affected by peer pressure, but I was. And it was this idea of wanting to be liked by all these people that, and frankly, I didn't even see a lot of those people ever again. I maybe saw one or two of them in total, but yeah, it's this idea, and many people fall prey to that in high school, but I can't stress this enough. Whatever age you are, listener right now listening, I don't even have to know your age. I know that peer pressure is still a thing that we deal with. It never really goes away. It's still there. It may be submerged and revealed in different ways now that you are an adult, or it may be camouflaged by your successes in life, your resumes, and all those things. Sometimes we bury ourselves in that, but really it's the desire to almost be competitive with other people and to be accepted by society. There's really an economy right now in the United States that goes beyond a financial economy. What's happening is there's an economy of more of what's the term I'm thinking of? Like morality, virtue signaling. That's what there's an economy of virtue, and so whatever our society holds up as virtuous, we want to say, oh, I want to be rich in that virtue too. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it's on all the wrong things.
Yeah.
We just recorded an episode earlier. It was one of the topics Cody brought, but it was kind of the weaknesses of Christianity and what we're facing in our culture today. And that's absolutely, the fear of man plays into that, because even if you don't necessarily agree with all of it, you don't want to be labeled a bigot.
Right.
You don't want to be labeled somebody who's, you don't want to be one of those Christians or something like that, because there's lots of animosity towards Christians these days. And so that peer pressure even works through that culture of virtue signaling.
I see that a lot, even in my own relationships. One of my closest friends, I still go to him for a lot of things. We don't hang out as much now that I'm out in Owasso. But he lives a life that's very in the world. He parties all the time, uses drugs, he's chasing women all the time, promiscuous, that kind of thing. And I'll find myself, even though, I feel very firmly about the things that I believe and I don't agree with his lifestyle, I'll find myself not speaking out against it when he tells me these things. Right. Even though it could serve him to say, hey man, are you sure this is the best path that you should be on? I find myself self-censoring because I don't want to offend him, or I'm afraid that I'm going to push him away if I bring these things up. So even though I feel bold in my faith and how I want to raise my family and how I want to conduct my own self, I'll censor and not project that onto him for fear of what if I offend him, or what if I push him away, things like that.
Well, you do too also need to become familiar with and get into the habit of listening to the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Because the Lord can use those situations to your benefit, to their benefit, because maybe you don't speak out in this moment, but the minute they think about what am I going to do with this situation, they'll be like, I'm going to ask Cody because Cody knows the Lord. What does he think? And then they're receptive to it. They think it's their idea to come to you and say, what do I do about this thing? And because you have never said anything when they have, you know what I mean? Because you weren't that person.
Yeah.
So it's
you were
like
slow to speak.
Yeah, you were slow to speak, right? But exactly, you're slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't speak out. I'm just making the point that sometimes maybe the Lord's going.
Yeah, you don't want to go the other way.
Maybe he's going. Not yet.
I'm really glad that you said that, because there's a story regarding this friend. He, like I said, chasing women, kind of promiscuous. He had this girlfriend. He got her pregnant, and he told me that she was going to have an abortion. And he said, what do I do? And he knows my stance on this. I'm very, very outspoken about this. Well, come to find out, I had an opportunity to talk with her about it, and she was very distraught. And come to find out that he is the one who encouraged her to do this.
Oh.
He had told her multiple times, you need to get rid of this baby. We can't have a child together. He told her, I want to pursue my career as a DJ. Things like that, just
because all those DJs out there are just doing so well,
and so he's not instilling this confidence, and on the contrary, he's encouraging her to do the opposite. And his dad told him, like, you need to save the life of this baby. You need to do something. You need to step up and be a man, And then he called me. He was like, I asked him, do you want me to come over? Because she was on her way. They were supposed to go to an appointment together. And he was like, yeah, I'd appreciate it if you came over. I went over there, and, we were all in the same room, and they were just arguing, basically screaming at each other. There was obviously a lot of contention in there. And then I had a short opportunity to talk to her one-on-one. And in that time, I feel like I made a good amount of progress in dissuading her from this decision, and telling her, like, listen, I know it's not going to be easy. She had just had a baby not that long ago. She wasn't doing very well financially. It was something that was a struggle for her. And on top of that, he's encouraging her to, terminate this pregnancy. And then he's coming like, well, I've changed my mind, So some flip-flopping there, and, not a lot of encouragement from him. Yeah. But I felt like I was able to make some progress there. And that day, she didn't end up going to the appointment.
Praise God. Yeah.
Unfortunately, she ended up going later, which is a big tragedy, and it makes me really sad because, the impact that it had on him was almost non-existent. And that to me is like, it's devastating to me. But I'm happy that in that moment he thought to reach out to me, even though he knew what I was going to say.
Yeah,
he wasn't looking for that affirmation. There was something telling him, like, I should reach out and get this input. And, there was a point where he was like, man, she had walked out to the car, and he was like, man, this is what I'm talking about. We just fight all the time and yada, yada. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care what the circumstance is. This has happened. You need to man up, step up, and take on this responsibility. That is what you should do. And, I don't usually talk to him like that. I don't usually, like I said, I'm a little more passive towards him. I don't want to push him away, but this is something I feel very strongly about. And, I spoke out in that way, and I could tell it impacted him in that moment. He did stay resolved in that. He said, I'm not going to support this. She ended up going on her own and doing it. And I think that's a reflection of the amount of security that she thought she was going to receive from him.
Yeah.
She was scared. It's a horrible situation. I don't think she wanted to do it. I felt like she felt like she didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
So
a lot of women feel like they're backed into a corner.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I felt, he knew what I was going to say. He knew I was going to, push back on him, and he still thought, I got to reach out and get his input.
No, I appreciate you guys bringing up this. It's a good case study for what I was going to talk about next in this, because the fear of man comes in many forms. It can come in the form of, I'm too scared to do this because of what people think. But it can also, what most people don't realize is another form of fearing man is the opposite approach of saying, I don't care what people think, I'm just going to say it all and stuff like that. And it really comes from a place of fear of, I have to be this way and I have to just ramrod things and not care about what people do. And it's a fear of what will happen if you don't do that. And it's really just another form of that. I'll get into it a little bit more, but so here are some ways that we can camouflage and be confronted with this fear of man. So I'll ask some questions, and then you as the listener think through these and think of how many of them would you say are true of you. This was sobering for me. So number one, are you overcommitted? Do you find it hard to say no even when wisdom indicates you should? Again, these are all forms of having a fear of people. Do you have needs from your spouse or friends? It's probably all of us.
Wait a minute. How to define needs?
Needs are based off of what you say are non-negotiable things. So not as needs in like an objective sense of like food, water, all the necessities. It's what you say, this is not negotiable. Somebody has to do this for me. Typically in a relationship, it can be in a form of entitlement almost, and saying, I expect this person to do this for me. And if I don't get that, then I don't love this person anymore, or they don't love me, essentially. That's probably an extreme version of it, but it comes in all forms. Sorry, I would like to unpack some of these. I'm just trying to keep this concise. This is a difficult subject to keep to a small podcast like what we're saying. Let me take an aside note here to say, as with all episodes, but especially this one, if you, the listener, feel like, oh man, this is calling me out, or I really feel like I struggle with this, don't just let it end here. Do more research, read your Bible, see what the Bible has to say on these things. Let this podcast just be an appetizer to whet your appetite for praying about these things, seeking the Holy Spirit's guidance and all these things. I'm just hopefully giving you a taste for all of this, and I hope to do it justice in this little time. But essentially, is self-worth, self-esteem a critical concern for you? Your life might be revolving around what others think. Do you ever feel like you might be exposed as an imposter? Many successful people do. I didn't heard this until recent years, but apparently there's something called imposter syndrome, where people who are successful, they believe people perceive me as this way, and I'm actually not as good as people, and they're almost self-degrading in that way. And there's a dear, I would say a friend of mine that used to work at where I worked, and he constantly said that about himself, and he took his own life. But I remember one of the last conversations we had with him in a work setting was he compared himself to, I don't even know what the movie name is, but I've heard of it at least, where there's a guy who, he's just a con artist. Like, he goes from place to place, and it's the story of his life, how he just had this attitude and asserted himself a certain way. Like, he even went into a hospital and asserted himself as a doctor, and people believed him. And so I don't know the name of that movie, but this guy I'm referring to that I knew personally that ended his life, one of the last conversations was he compared himself to that guy.
That incident that you're speaking about was probably and it's not a contest, but it was like one of the easily most devastating occurrences in my life personally.
Yeah.
I was
Shocking.
really close to that guy, and that defines what the situation was. He could not live with his sin.
Yeah.
He could not live with the sin that plagued him.
I still, to this day, I've even had dreams about it, where I'm able to go back in time and sit down and have a conversation with him, and just say, like, care about you, brother.
Yeah. I sank into a serious depression when that happened.
Yeah.
I've been sober for like over a decade, and went right back to chemicals because, and I've of course since have clarity of thought and everything like that. The Lord's grown my spirit in a way, and since that incident. But just to say, and just for, well, I'm not going to get into the details of the story, but basically this person did something he shouldn't have done. And when he did, the weight of his sin, the guilt of his sin weighed on him so heavily that he could not stand to go any longer. And I get it, but like this guy, he was surrounded by people who would have said the same thing that you just said. Care about you, brother. Love you. You know, this is not the end. This is bad, but it's not worth all that. And so, yeah, that was quite a time.
Yeah, for sure. Like I very few people probably do understand the full weight of everything that he was under, but just understand, like, it's less about me understanding the full scope of what he was going through, and more important to understand it began in seed form as this terrible fear of his reputation crumbling around him, everything that he had done, and what people would perceive about him, and it ultimately being higher than. And I don't say that to criticize him either. It's just, I believe it's a telltale story, a cautionary tale, if you will, is what I meant to say, of how far this can drag you down. Yeah,
I ascribe no real... I liken it to getting stabbed in the belly in a dark alley.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, didn't know what to do with it, and the way he reacted was so permanent, and nobody had a chance to say, because nobody knew about it. It just came out of the blue. Because nobody knew anything about it. It was like nobody had a chance to say, "Hey, guess what? Like, there's a path out here," you know. And
he didn't reach out to anybody.
He didn't exactly.
That
no one.
Of.
We actually thought that his death was an accident.
Yeah, for a while.
Yep. And of course we were devastated, you know. And this guy was in our estimation, a committed, faithful believer, like more than your average.
Never would have seen that coming.
Never in a million years. And that's why I say, like, it really was like a getting attacked in an alley by a predator, because it really was just like on any other day and any other, you know, it's like, it seems like on any given day he would have not done that, but alas.
Yeah, I didn't even mean to go into that whole situation, but that's just how it happened. It came to my mind as I was talking about this, because like I said, like, I'll still think about it to this day, and you know, at the very least, situations like that can be, what can I do, what can I be observant of in the future with people to try to just be our brother's keeper, right? So moving on to some of these examples again, asking yourself, is this true of me? Do you find yourself second-guessing decisions because of what others might think? Do you fear making mistakes? Man, do I fear making mistakes, just speaking for me personally. It's the fear of man. Do you feel empty or meaningless at times? Do you experience love hunger? Do you get easily embarrassed? I will say this. A seed form of this kind of thing I struggle with as an adult took form as a child of, he's just shy. He's shy around other people. And shyness is a real thing, but what can ultimately be rooted at and grow into is a fear of people, fear of man. Do you tell white lies? Do you get jealous of other people? Do other people often make you angry or depressed? Do you avoid people? Our lives are often defined by people and their perception of us rather than God. Big people, and I've said this before, this is kind of, I think, episode 1 of our podcast.
Very first one, yep.
Big people make big problems small. Small people make small problems big. So that is part of this discussion when it comes to the fear of man. Aggressively asserting that you don't need anyone is just as much evidence of the fear of man as the more timid examples that we have just gone over. Aggressively saying, I don't need anybody, I'm a lone wolf, I can handle this, I don't care what other people think. The core of it is still the fear of man. With the fear of God rather than the fear of man, it is, I must bear my brother's burdens. I must be there for them. Part of loving people is lovingly telling them, hey, brother, I care about you, but here's some biblical truth here. A common solution you hear is, I just need to love myself more. Some say, God loves me more than I know, which is true, but it doesn't get at the root issue. God isn't seeking to make us feel better about ourselves as the chief end. So taking all this, I tried to unpack that as best as I could, but what is kind of the biblical response about this?
Before you do that, can you tell me the second or third one? Read off the first 4 or 5
those questions.
Yeah, I wanted to address something and I forget.
Sure. Yep. Number 3 or 4?
Try them.
Number 3 is self-worth, self-esteem, and a critical concern for you. Your life might revolve around that.
Yeah, coming from a position of someone who had 0 of that, I wonder, is there, and I don't have a theology for this, it's not something I prepared in advance, but do you think I think we did talk about this actually in a podcast. Is there a place for self-confidence in the Lord? Like,
yes, it is.
I mean, so it's like to say, like, do you find it to be important? Or what was the question? Do you find it?
Yeah. Do you find your life revolving around what others might think? Is that what your self-worth?
No. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Is that what your self-worth is wrapped up in?
Yeah, I guess I understood the question a little differently.
Self-esteem.
Yeah, self-worth or self-esteem is...
Is it a critical concern for you?
That's it. And yeah. I think it is a critical concern. I think I probably checked all those boxes, or not all of them, but probably 70% of them. Mm-hmm. So that is definitely like, okay, yeah, that's definitely a problem for me. But I wonder about the self-worth one because it should be, the word critical, I think, is what we might equivocate, right? It's like, it shouldn't be absolutely must, you know what I mean? It isn't really about you, but at the same time, like, there is a place in the Lord for, like, no.
Yeah, it's what you derive your self-worth from.
Yeah.
The fear of man will if you're basing your worth off of the fear of man and what they think about you, it's always going to be disastrous for you. Basing it off of God and what He thinks about you, He says, you are called, you are chosen, you are a son of mine, all those things. You know, if you're a believer, all those things that God says about you, that should be where we get our self-worth from. Absolutely. The most radical treatment for the fear of man is this: God must be bigger to you than people are. Regarding other people, our problem is that we need them for ourselves more than we love them for the glory of God. So don't get me wrong. This episode is not about I need to not care about people. That's the wrong message. It's I care about people because God cares about them. And I love them through God's eyes, not through my own eyes.
Paul talks about how he feels about the Thessalonian believers in Thessalonians 3, and a lot of it is like, I sent Timothy to encourage and strengthen you in your faith. Mm-hmm. You are our joy and our crown. We really live if you stand firm in the Lord. You know what I mean? And so it's that idea that we look at the cross, and in light of it, we know what it really means to be saved by grace.
Yes.
Then we want to see things through God's eyes. And then that seeing through his eyes and having his desires and understanding the desire for the righteous life that he desires, that builds a foundation for love. And if he had love for us, then he must have love for others. And we have that love for others. So it's like that from the top and around.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the ways I see as being there's so many ways that Scripture answers this problem of the fear of man, and how do I overcome it? But there's lots of good nuggets here in Psalm 139. The first verse says, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my down sitting, mine uprising. You understand my thoughts from afar. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. So knowing that God knows us, it does so much to combat the fear of man, because we may have a guise of what other people can see, but nothing is hidden from the Lord. The Lord knows about us, for better or for worse. And the psalmist even said in verse 17 there, how precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God, how great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee. And let's see, at the very end here, 23. So this is how that whole chapter is wrapped up. It says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Part of the way he leads us is through the fear of God. Much is said in Proverbs about the fear of God. It says it's the beginning of understanding, the beginning of wisdom. For us to ever have that true worship in spirit and in truth, as Jesus put it, we must have a true reverential fear of God. And really, that's speaking to the awe of God. God is an awesome God. Great is our God. That is what that is. It's not the same way that we fear man. It's really two different definitions of the same word, fear. We must regarding other people. Our problem is that we need them for ourselves more than we love them for the glory of God. And then, so some final thoughts here on how do we combat this in our own life. Number one, recognize that making your need for other people's approval is just making other people an idol in your life. Identify where your fear of man has been intensified by your past. Have you gone through past trauma? Have you gone through past hurt? Identify where that has taken place in your life and be aware of it, how it can be affecting your present life. Number 3, fear God instead of man. You say, well, that sounds easy, but how do you actually do that? Understand and grow in the fear of the Lord. The person who fears God, what else do they have to fear? I believe it was a psalmist that said, whom shall I fear? There's a famous, I think, Casting Crowns song that references that. Number 4, examine where your desires have been too big. When you fear people are too big, your desires are even bigger, and God is too small in your life. Ask God to have his proper place again in your life. Number 5, rejoice that God has covered your shame, protected you from danger, and accepted you. He has filled you with his love. You don't need to be filled by anyone else. It's great when it is, and it's a blessing, right? That we have spouses, we have people that care about us. Praise God for that. But you are perfectly filled by his love alone. And finally, love other people. Need them less, love them more. Out of obedience to Christ and as a response of his love toward you, pursue others in the love of God. That's, he said, even as I have loved you, love others. That's really, he said, what was it that Jesus said? All the law hangs on this one thing. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. That comes, and we cannot do that. The fear of man impedes us from doing that. It really does. 1 John 4:18 says about this, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear. Are you dealing with fear of man? Perfect love. Where does perfect love come from? From the Lord. Because fear hath torment, he that feareth is not made perfect in love. So really, I think, Dan, you might have said this in an earlier episode we recorded, but God has saved us from that. He paid so high a price for all these things, and what was it, the way that you put it?
I said you don't have a right to own your sin.
Yeah.
It's not yours to own because he bought it.
Right.
With a price.
And we do have the right because Jesus made it for us, the love of God. We have that through Christ. We have that, and it is made available to all people. For God so loved the world. And so we have that. It's for all people. We are to be perfected in love, have fear, can be cast out in perfect love, the love of God.
I may have mentioned this in my testimony, when I did my testimony, but I'll say it again. When I was becoming a believer, when I was sort of on the last sort of few events before I actually sort of came to know the Lord, it's hard to point to a moment or to remember the chronology of it all. Mm-hmm. But I used to really idolize relationships, right? Remember I said I wanted to be cool, right? Mm-hmm. And part of that was like have a woman, you know what I mean? Have like a really, I never was like into like use them up and throw them away and all that stuff. I knew that wasn't like cool, but I wanted to have like a solid relationship, So I idolized that, and I heard this song called Lady Love from this band Mike Mains and the Branches, where he says, "Lady Love, oh Lady Love, what have we become? If you're the center of my universe, then tell me what is left when you're gone." And I always thought that meant she's so awesome that what is left for him when she's gone? Yeah. But his point was, if I'm putting everything that I am into this relationship or into my relationship with this woman, and then she disappears, I'm going to absolutely crumble.
Yeah. And what a weight to put on somebody else that we proclaim to love, right? But then to put all that expectation on, like, you are it. Yeah, that's so hard on that other person.
Yeah, or like with fear of man, when you kind of revere them in a way, mm-hmm. and then when they inevitably let you down, where are you going to be?
Yeah, yep. If you have a marriage where when there's a disagreement or things are not right, and it's just like it all comes crashing down in heavy fashion, it's because there was this idea that we're great. Things are great together. They love me. And then suddenly, oh, it's not there. And it's the end of the world. Like that should give you pause. Like, why am I doubling over every time that love isn't there? That can be hard. I'll say this as a way of like a personal testimony to close here. When I was, again, like I said in the beginning, I was about 11 years old when I was really pondering marriage and like I really want to get married. I desired to get married even from that young age, and I didn't really know what like was all involved in marriage or how to be a husband at that point, but I at least desired it. And God had to slowly reveal to me, you're desiring a good thing, but you're desiring it for the wrong reasons. And it came to a point where when I was 16, I don't think I've shared this story before, but I'll try to be brief about this. A cool thing that God worked out in my life was, at the time, I was very dead set on like, I've got to have a relationship right now, because if I don't get a relationship started at 16, pretty soon I'm going to graduate. I'm not going to find anybody. Like I was already in despair over it. I was already like, I'm never going to find anybody at 16. Sounds silly at this point, but that's where I was at. I was devastated. And furthermore, I thought I had found somebody that I was going to marry. And then basically I just got told like, it's never going to happen. And that just absolutely devastated me. And then I remember thinking as a 16-year-old that, man, I think I'm going about this all wrong. Like, what if God doesn't even want me to be married someday? Have I ever considered that possibility? Maybe I'm idolizing this too much, and it's got me consumed by whether it's going to happen or not. And so I remember the same day that happened, it basically was like a slam door in my face, like, nope, not going to happen. That same day, late at night, I remember it was after church on a Sunday, I got a friend request on Facebook from some random girl that I'd never met. And she said, I think you're my cousin. And she sent me a friend request. And I was like, what? I don't know this person. So out of curiosity, I accepted the friend request. And then I said, are you really my cousin? And she thought I was her cousin, like pulling a joke or something.
What was the evidence that she was going off of?
She was going off of an obscure picture of me that you could barely see my face. It was mostly concealed. She thought it was her actual cousin, who was also had the same first and last name as me. So, and he lived around my general area. I think he lived in a different city, but it was a neighboring city. And, small world, another person the exact same name as me. And my last name is not that common either. But anyway, so I got this friend request, and when she figured out that I was not her cousin, it was like, okay, I just accepted it. I just sent a friend request to somebody who could be a serial killer, like all that kind of stuff. And so I could tell even through this chat that we had going that she's scared now. And like, yeah, I said, don't worry. I said, I won't be offended if you remove me. I was just curious too. I'd even asked my dad, like, do we have any relatives in Michigan? And he's like, oh no, all the family, at least on that name, that last name is all here in this general area. We're all Texans, like that was kind of the sentiment. But I'll never forget, like right before I got that friend request, I had spent some time in my room after I got home, and I had said, Lord, I'm surrendering this over to you. I've made it an idol in my life, and I cannot continue to agonize over this. I leave it in your hands, God. And I don't need all I have already in you. I said those exact words in that prayer. And little did I know I was getting a friend request later that night for who would end up being my wife. and I won't say it will always go like that for you, the listener. Like God will show up that day. But man, the sooner we can surrender those things over the Lord and say, I don't need this in my life to be fulfilled. God, you fulfill me.
Just real quick, that reminds me of something that I've heard where it's whatever you worship above God, that's the area in your life where you're going to have trouble. So if you idolize money, you'll have money problems. If you idolize relationships, you'll have relationship problems. Whatever you're trying to put before God, that will end up being a detriment to you. And when you put God first, it's like Matthew chapter 6. Mm-hmm. It's like the Lord knows you need these things, and all these things will be added onto you.
Right.
Seek first the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, all these things you're worried about, like you're saying, seek Him first. It'll fall into place. Thank you for listening to the Life and Faith podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review on your favorite platform, and sharing it with friends and family. Your support helps us continue spreading the gospel of faith, hope, and love. Connect with us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many others to stay updated on our latest episodes. See the link in the show notes for all our social media channels. And until next time, it is our hope you'll commit yourself to an even deeper life in faith.